Alright guys, so before we get too far into this project, I wanted to talk to you about some of the tools you have available to you and how to use them. So each table is going to have an orange caddy like this, and you should all have the same amount of supplies in them. Every time you're working with clay, you want to lay one of these canvas tablecloths down on your table in front of you. If you don't have one of these, your clay might get stuck to the table and it would ruin your pinch pot. So before we start talking about how to put your pinch pots together, I wanted to show you some of the tools. These pointy tools are called needle tools. So they're either going to look black like this or they'll have a wooden handle. And these are really good for slipping and scoring. You're going to have paintbrushes and a little bit of this muddy water, which is called slip. The paintbrushes are good for painting the slip onto your clay when you're trying to attach stuff. You're going to have a bunch of wooden tools that look like this. These are just called wooden tools. You can use them for smoothing your attachments onto your pinch pots. And then some of them have like a cool texture, so you could also use these for slipping and scoring. You have these tools with loops on the end. These are called ribbon tools. And you can use these to carve your pieces. Let's say you want your piece to have more of a sculpted look. You can use these to carve away some of your pinch pot. And then these metal tools are called rib tools. So rib tools are good for smoothing out your clay, which I'll show you here in a second. So I have both my pinch pots constructed. You want to make sure when you go to put them together that they match up. If one is bigger than the other, you're going to either want to make your bigger one smaller by collaring it in a bit, or make your smaller one bigger just by pinching it out slightly. You don't want your clay walls to be really thin. They should be pretty even. You want to tap the edges on the table surface just to make sure they're nice and flat. If your walls are really thin like this, that's not going to work because it's not supportive enough and your pinch pot will collapse. So before you attach them together, you want to make sure your walls are as smooth as possible. So in order to do that, I'm going to put a little bit of slip on my pinch pot. I'm not putting too much. And then you're just going to take your metal rib and smooth out any of the lumps you see. You can also use your fingers if that works better for you. So once you have both your pinch pots smooth, you're going to attach them together. So the way you do that is by putting score marks. So think of them kind of like little hashtags. You're just going to put them all along the edges wherever you're going to attach. And what these score marks do is they provide a friction so your clay has something to hold on to. If we just try to attach two clay objects together that are smooth, there's nothing for them to grip, and that's how clay falls apart. So I'm going to take a little slip on my paintbrush and just paint the edges where I'm going to attach. You want to think of the slip like your glue. So it's kind of like glue in a way. It's just clay with water. Now, if you feel like your clay walls are too thin or they kind of feel flimsy, you could actually take some paper towel and stuff it inside, and that just keeps your structure stable while you're working. And when it goes in the kiln, it'll just burn up and just turn to dust, so there's nothing to worry about there. So now that I have these together, I want to close up that seam because we don't want to see that. So I'm going to take a little bit of slip on the seam, and I'm going to take my rib tool, and you're basically just going to be closing up that seam. You can use your fingers if you don't care about getting messy. You want to make sure you're not overdoing it with the slip and the water. If you overwater your piece, it's actually going to cause more cracks in the future, so you don't want to overdo it with that. You can also use your wooden tools if the rib tool is being used or you're just not a fan of it. So you're just basically closing that gap. Okay? Now, depending on what you're making, you may need to shape this a little bit. Like if you want more of an oval body, you're obviously going to have to carefully press this more into an oval shape. If you're doing something like a basketball, you're going to want it more circular. It just depends on what you're doing. You can gently shape this once it's closed up. You just want to be careful that you're not putting too much pressure, because then the whole thing will kind of like explode on itself. Okay, so now that I have the body of whatever I'm creating, you want to create an exit hole so that the air that's trapped inside can get out. So I'm just going to use the back of the needle tool, and I'm going to put the exit hole on the bottom of my piece where no one will see it. So I'm just going to carefully make the hole, and I'm not going all the way through to the top. I'm going to stop in the middle. Okay. And eventually you're going to want to scratch your name on this so we know it's yours. Now once you have the pinch pot closed form constructed, if it kind of looks like a lumpy baked potato, that means you're doing it right. The next thing and the last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was attaching separate things to your piece. So let's pretend like I'm going to attach this. I don't really know what it is. I just randomly made it. The first thing I always want to do is slip and score. So let's say I'm going to attach it to the side here. I'm going to put my score marks. It's just like a bunch of hashtags. And then I need to put score marks on the object that I'm attaching. And then I need to put slip. Okay, so now that I have it like that, if I don't seal this off, it'll fall off. See, it just falls off. So what you actually want to do, once you have this attached, you're going to take your wooden tool and you're just going to go where you see the seam of the object meet the pinch pot. You're just going to gently smooth that out so we don't see where the objects meet. It should look natural. So I'm just taking that and putting it together so it has a more stable foundation, okay? So anything that you're attaching, you want to make sure that you slip and score. If you don't, odds are it's going to fall off. Those are just a couple tips for you guys to get started on your pinch pots.